The Other Boleyn Girl is a 2008 historical romantic drama film directed by Justin Chadwick. The screenplay by Peter Morgan was adapted from Philippa Gregory's 2001 novel of the same name. It is a fictionalized account of the lives of 16th-century aristocrats Mary Boleyn, one-time mistress of King Henry VIII, and her sister, Anne, who became the monarch's ill-fated second wife, though the film does not represent history accurately. King Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon is troubled as she has not produced a living male heir to the throne, having only one surviving child, Princess Mary. Mary Boleyn marries William Carey. After the festivities, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, and his brother-in-law Thomas Boleyn plot to install Thomas's eldest daughter, Anne, as the king's mistress, with the hope that she will bear him a son and improve the family's wealth and status, much to the disgust of Anne's mother, Lady Elizabeth. Despite knowing that being a mistress will damage her chances of a high-ranking marriage, a reluctant Anne agrees to please her father and uncle. While visiting the Boleyn estate, Henry is injured in a hunting accident indirectly caused by Anne. Urged by her scheming uncle, Mary nurses Henry. Henry becomes smitten and invites her to court, to which Mary and her husband reluctantly agree, fully aware of what will be expected of her. Mary and Anne become ladies-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, and Henry sends William Carey abroad on an assignment. Separated from her husband, Mary begins a passionate affair with the king and finds herself falling in love with him. Anne secretly marries the nobleman Henry Percy, although he is already betrothed to Lady Mary Talbot. Anne confides in her brother, George Boleyn, about the marriage. Overjoyed, George proceeds to tell Mary. Fearing Anne will ruin their family, Mary alerts her father and uncle. They confront Anne, forcibly annul the marriage, and exile her to France. Mary eventually becomes pregnant with Henry's child. Her family receives new grants and estates, their debts are paid, and Henry arranges George's marriage to Jane Parker. When Mary nearly suffers a miscarriage, she is confined to bed until the child is born. Norfolk recalls Anne to England and is tasked to keep Henry's attention from wandering to another rival while Mary is confined. Believing that Mary betrayed her solely to increase her status, a revenge-driven Anne starts seducing Henry herself. When Mary gives birth to a son, Henry Carey, Thomas and Norfolk are thrilled, but the celebration is short-lived as Anne tells the king that the boy is still a bastard who can never inherit the throne. She also states that for her to accept his advances, he must no longer bed his wife and stop talking to Mary completely. This infuriates Norfolk, as Henry refuses to acknowledge the baby as his heir, but later changes his mind when Anne reveals her intent to give the king a legitimate son. At her request, Henry has Mary exiled to the countryside, leaving her heartbroken. Her grief only grows when her husband dies of the sweating sickness, leaving her a widow. Anne further manipulates Henry into breaking from the Catholic Church when the Pope refuses to annul his marriage to Queen Catherine. A smitten Henry succumbs to her demands, declares himself supreme head of the Church of England, gets Cardinal Thomas Wolsey to annul the marriage, and Catherine is banished from court. Having fulfilled her requests, Henry comes to Anne's chambers, but she still refuses to have sex with him until they are married, not wanting to give birth to a son out of wedlock. Overcome with both rage and lust, Henry brutally rapes her. While deeply traumatized by the assault, a now pregnant Anne marries Henry to please her family and becomes the new Queen of England. Mary is recalled to court to serve Anne, and the sisters form an uneasy truce for the sake of their family. Later on, Mary meets William Stafford, a financially modest, but kind soldier, and a romance eventually blossoms between the two. Despite the birth of a healthy daughter, Elizabeth, Henry blames Anne for not immediately producing a son. As queen, she is greatly hated by the public, who denounce her as a witch, while as a wife, Henry starts to despise her and begins courting Jane Seymour in secret. As her marriage falls apart, Anne becomes increasingly depressed and paranoid. After she miscarries a son, a hysterical Anne begs George to impregnate her again out of fear of being burned at the stake for witchcraft. At first, George reluctantly agrees, seeing it not only as Anne's only chance for survival, but their entire family's. However, the pair do not go through with the act. Unbeknownst to them though, George's neglected wife, Jane, under orders from Norfolk to spy on Anne, witnesses enough of the encounter to become suspicious. She reports her findings and the two are arrested. Despite the lack of any solid evidence, Anne and George are immediately found guilty by a biased jury and sentenced to death for treason, adultery and incest. A devastated Lady Elizabeth disowns both her husband and brother, vowing never to forgive them for the pain and destruction they brought upon all of her children solely out of their own quest for power. Leaving her children with Stafford, Mary rushes back to London but arrives too late to save George, who is beheaded in front of their horrified father. Henry agrees to meet with her and she pleads with him to spare Anne's life, stating that her sister is her other half. Due to him saying he would never harm any part of her, Mary believes Anne has been spared and leaves to see her right before the scheduled execution. The two sisters truly reconcile and Anne asks Mary to look after Elizabeth if anything should happen to her. As the execution begins, Mary watches Anne make her final speech, waiting for the cancellation. A messenger then delivers a letter from the king to her, revealing his decision to have Anne executed after all and warning her to never return to his court again. Mary can only watch in horror as her sister is beheaded. She fulfills her final promise to Anne and immediately leaves court with the toddler Elizabeth. A textual epilogue reveals Thomas died 2 years after Anne and George's executions while Norfolk was imprisoned and the next 3 generations of his family executed for treason. Mary married Stafford and lived out her days away from court, and Elizabeth went on to rule England for over 40 years as queen.